Hi everyone. Tonight we're trading your Wi-Fi, your toothbrush, and your basic expectation of indoor plumbing for togas, gossip, and a bathhouse full of strangers who have never once heard of personal space. Welcome to ancient Rome. Not the marble and poetry version they show you in the history books, but the real one. Sweaty, loud, occasionally on fire, and about to make you very grateful for your own shower. Before we get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. Now dim the lights. Switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get cozy, and maybe don't think too hard about what's floating in the public bathwater. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it actually smelled like to walk through a city with no sewage system and an enthusiastic love of garlic? Could you survive getting undressed in a room full of complete strangers just to take a bath? Would you know which bucket of oil was for your skin and which was, regrettably, for something else entirely? And could you make it through an entire dinner party lying on your side, eating with your fingers, while a slave stands 2 feet away judging your table manners? And now, congratulations, you've just arrived in Rome. The year is 120 AD. You have no soap, no privacy, and an appointment at the bathhouse you didn't know you'd made. Let's get you cleaned up. Let's start with the noise, because there is no version of Rome that includes silence. The moment the sky lightens, the city simply switches on, like someone flipped a very ancient, very creaky breaker. Cartwheels grind over cobblestones. Vendors bellow the price of bread as though it's breaking news. Somewhere above you, in a building that should not legally exist, a family is having an argument about a chicken. Rome does not ease into the day. Rome arrives at the day already shouting. Consider for a moment what 1 million people crammed into a handful of square miles actually sounds like, with no engines, no headphones, and absolutely no concept of an inside voice. Doors bang, donkeys complain. A baker somewhere is having a very public disagreement with a customer over the weight of a loaf, and the whole street has decided this is everyone's business now. Rome is a city built entirely out of exposed brick, thin walls, and people who have never once considered lowering their voices indoors. Which means your neighbour's breakfast plans become your breakfast plans, whether you asked for them or not. The mornings bring a particular kind of chaos, because Rome runs its heavy cart traffic exclusively at night. A law from a few decades back banned wheeled vehicles from the city streets during daylight hours to ease the congestion, which sounds sensible until you realize it's simply relocated all that grinding, rattling, iron-wheeled misery to the hours when people are supposed to be asleep. So the carts thunder through at 3 a.m. instead, hauling grain, stone and timber past your window with all the consideration of a marching band that wasn't invited but showed up anyway. You will learn to sleep through it. You will not enjoy learning. By the time true morning arrives, the streets have already filled with a working rhythm of the city. Bakers are pulling bread from ovens that have been burning since well before dawn. Water carriers haul jugs from the public fountains, balancing them with practiced ease, while somehow also arguing with a friend 3 streets over at full volume. Somewhere, a rooster is doing his one job with tremendous enthusiasm, and somewhere else, a dog is responding to that rooster as though personally offended. It's worth pointing out that Rome's population density at its peak rivals or exceeds many modern cities, all packed into a footprint without a single elevator, escalator, or quiet corner. Ever tried living in an apartment building where you can hear every argument, every dropped pot, and every suspicious late-night snack run through the floor above you? Multiply that by an entire civilization with paper-thin walls and zero regard for personal volume, and you've got something close to the actual soundscape of daily Rome. And yet, somehow, people manage. They shout over each other and laugh just as loudly a moment later. Rivalries flare in the morning and are forgotten by lunch, mostly because nobody has the stamina to stay mad for that long over the sound of someone else's rooster. There is a rhythm to it, chaotic and relentless, but a rhythm all the same, the kind that becomes strangely comforting once you stop expecting quiet and simply accept that Rome, like a toddler with excellent lungs, is simply never going to whisper. So you'd better get used to it, because your first full day in this city is only just getting started. And it begins, appropriately enough, with you waking up somewhere that creaks. It's time to open your eyes, and unfortunately, the first thing you notice is the ceiling, which is closer than you'd like, and possibly on fire 2 floors down. This is the insula, Rome's answer to the apartment building, a towering, wobbly stack of rented rooms with all the structural confidence of a stack of pancakes. You live somewhere around the 4th floor, which means fresh air, a lovely view, and an evacuation plan that mostly consists of running very fast. Take a moment to appreciate the architecture, because it is genuinely remarkable in its ambition and genuinely terrifying in its execution. These buildings rise 5, 6, sometimes 7 stories, built quickly and cheaply out of timber, mud brick, and a builder's optimistic assumption that gravity will be reasonable about the whole thing. The ground floor usually houses a shop, a bakery, maybe a wine bar, all humming with commerce before you've even had a chance to find your sandals. The upper floors, however, get progressively flimsier the higher you climb, which is exactly the opposite of how you'd want a building to behave, and exactly the reason rent gets cheaper the closer you are to the sky, and the closer you are to disaster. Your room itself is small, dim, and shared with considerably more insects than you were told about at check-in. There's a straw mattress, a single window with no glass, just a shutter you can close against the weather, and walls thin enough that you can hear your neighbour's entire domestic life unfold in real time. Ever lived in an apartment where you could hear the couple next door discussing dinner plans through the wall? Rome invented that experience and then removed the wall's ability to do its job at all. Fire is the real menace here, and everyone knows it. Cooking is done over open flame, oil lamps flicker in every room after dark, and the buildings are packed so tightly together that a fire starting in one insula can leap to the next before anyone's finished shouting about it. Rome has, at various points, watched entire districts burn to the ground, And the response each time has been to rebuild quickly, cheaply, and with roughly the same fire risk as before. It's the ancient equivalent of putting a new welcome mat outside a house you know is going to flood again. Landlords, for their part, are notorious for cutting corners, skimping on materials, packing in extra tenants, and generally treating structural integrity as more of a suggestion than a requirement. Collapses do happen, often enough that residents develop a kind of resigned, dark humour about which buildings to avoid and which landlords not to trust. It is, in essence, the original slumlord problem, minus the paperwork and plus significantly more open flame. And yet you stay, because everyone stays, because this is simply what living in the greatest city on earth costs. You climb your rickety stairs each morning. You duck under a sagging beam that's been sagging for longer than you've lived here. And you tell yourself, as everyone does, that this particular building will probably hold. Probably. It's not confidence exactly. It's more like Room's unofficial civic motto. It hasn't fallen yet, so let's just go about our day. Let's talk about breakfast, a meal the Romans treat with all the enthusiasm of a chore they'd rather skip entirely. There is no leisurely spread waiting for you. There's bread, maybe a bit of cheese, perhaps an olive if the day is feeling generous, eaten standing up, quickly, like a man trying to leave before his mother-in-law arrives. The Romans consider a big breakfast a little suspicious, the culinary equivalent of showing off. This meal, called ientaculum, is treated as barely worth naming at all. Many Romans skip it entirely, grabbing only a piece of bread dipped in wine or a bit of cheese on the way out the door, the ancient equivalent of eating a granola bar over the sink while already reaching for your coat. There's no ceremony to it, no sitting down at a table, no lingering. You eat because your body demands fuel, not because anyone considers the moment worth savouring, which stands in stark contrast to how seriously the evening meal will be treated later tonight. If you're feeling slightly more indulgent, you might pick up something from a thermopolium, one of the small food counters built directly into the street level of buildings all over the city. These are essentially Rome's version of a corner takeout stand, complete with built-in jars sunk into the counter to keep stews, wine, and porridge warm and ready. You lean over the counter, point at what looks appealing, hand over a coin, and eat standing on the sidewalk while the city rushes past you in both directions. Ever grabbed a coffee and a pastry on your way to catch a train, eating half of it before you've even left the shop? Congratulations, you've just recreated a 2,000-year-old Roman morning routine, minus the coffee. Bread itself is the true backbone of the meal, dense, coarse, and baked fresh in ovens that never seem to stop running. The best of it comes from public bakeries where the smell alone could wake a heavy sleeper 3 streets over. Warm and yeasty, curling out into the morning air before the sun has fully committed to rising. Poorer households might have only the roughest, grittiest loaves, occasionally gritty enough to wear down teeth over a lifetime, which is a genuinely unsettling piece of dental history to sit with over your morning meal. Cheese, when available, is usually a simple, salty affair, sometimes paired with a handful of olives that have been sitting in brine long enough to pucker your whole face on the first bite. Fruit might make an appearance if the season allows it. Figs or grapes eaten straight from the hand, sticky and sweet, gone in 3 bites standing on a street corner while someone's cart nearly runs over your foot. There is, admittedly, something almost refreshing about the simplicity of it. No elaborate spread, no fuss, no decision paralysis standing in front of an open cupboard. You eat something small, you eat it fast, and then you are out the door and swallowed into the noise of the street, because Rome has never once waited patiently for anyone to finish chewing. Now for the toga, an item of clothing that is technically just a very large, very stubborn bedsheet. Wrapping it correctly takes practice, patience, and ideally a second person, because doing it alone is like trying to make a bed while you're still lying in it. Get it wrong, and you'll spend the whole day quietly readjusting yourself in public, which is, coincidentally, also what half of Rome is doing at any given moment. The toga itself is an enormous semicircle of heavy wool fabric, sometimes 20 feet across when fully unfolded, which raises the immediate and reasonable question of how anyone is expected to walk, let alone conduct business, while draped in what amounts to a full picnic blanket. The answer is careful, practiced folding, a series of drapes and tucks passed down through generations of Roman households, usually with the help of a slave whose entire morning job is making sure you don't trip over your own outfit in front of the Senate. And here's the detail that tends to surprise people. The toga is reserved specifically for Roman male citizens, a walking symbol of status and legal standing rather than simple daily clothing. Most people, in fact, don't bother with it for regular activity at all, because it's heavy, hot, restrictive, and thoroughly impractical for anyone who actually needs to move quickly or do physical work. It's less an everyday garment and more a ceremonial uniform, worn to important public events, official business, or anywhere you need to visibly announce your citizenship without saying a word. Ever put on a suit for an important meeting and immediately regretted every layer of it by lunchtime? The toga is that feeling, except it also threatens to unravel entirely if you sit down wrong. For actual daily life, most Romans opt for the tunic instead, a simple, practical garment that slips over the head and belts at the waist, allowing you to walk, work, and generally exist without constantly checking whether your outfit has slipped off one shoulder. Slaves, labourers, and most ordinary citizens wear tunics of varying quality and colour, depending on their means. The wealthy in finer dyed wool, the poor in plain, undyed fabric that shows every stain from the day's work almost immediately. Colour and fabric quality function here the way a well-tailored coat or a recognisable brand might in your own wardrobe. A quiet but immediate signal of exactly where you sit in society before you've said a single word. Purple dye, extracted at enormous expense from a particular sea snail, is so costly that it becomes reserved almost exclusively for senators and emperors. A stripe of it on your toga announcing your rank the way a certain car in a parking lot announces someone's salary. Getting dressed each morning, then, becomes a small daily performance of identity, a wordless statement about who you are and where you stand before you've even stepped onto the street. You fold, you drape, you adjust, and you hope desperately that nothing shifts loose the moment you're required to greet someone important, because in Rome, wardrobe malfunctions are not merely embarrassing, they are, quite literally, a matter of public record. Let's head outside and immediately, bravely, watch your step. Roman streets are an obstacle course of mud, market stalls, wandering goats, and the occasional bucket of household waste tossed from a window above, with all the warning of a foghorn in a library. There are no sidewalks in the way you'd imagine them, just a general suggestion of where pedestrians might walk if the carts allow it, which they usually don't. Look down, and you'll notice something clever hiding beneath all the chaos. Raised stepping stones set into many major streets, spaced perfectly for pedestrians to cross without stepping directly into the muck, while cartwheels pass neatly through the gaps between them. It's a genuinely elegant piece of urban design, the ancient equivalent of a crosswalk, except the stakes for missing your footing are considerably higher than a honking car. Miss your step here, and you're not just embarrassed, you're now wearing whatever was flowing down that particular stretch of road. The smell deserves its own honest mention, because Rome, for all its aqueducts and engineering marvels, has no comprehensive sewage system reaching every corner of the city. Waste, both human and otherwise, finds its way into the streets with some regularity, mixing with animal dung, rotting market scraps, and the general debris of a million people going about their business. Ever walked past an overflowing dumpster on a hot day and had to hold your breath for the length of a city block? Now imagine that smell as the ambient background note of your entire commute. Every single day, rain or shine. Merchants have claimed nearly every available inch of space along the main thoroughfares, setting up stalls that spill out from shop fronts and narrow the already tight streets into something closer to a crowded hallway than an actual road. You'll squeeze past baskets of vegetables, dodge a butcher swinging a cleaver with more enthusiasm than precision, and step gingerly around a chicken that has, for reasons known only to itself, decided this particular street corner is its new permanent home. Above you, the insulae lean inward slightly as they rise, blocking much of the sunlight and creating narrow, shadowy corridors even at midday. It's a striking visual. Tall buildings crowding close enough that residents on facing balconies could practically pass a cup of wine between windows, though the practical effect is a city that always feels a touch claustrophobic, a permanent urban canyon of brick and noise. And then there's the traffic of people themselves, a constant crush of bodies moving in every direction. Slaves running errands, senators trailed by attendants, vendors hauling baskets balanced on their heads, and children darting between legs with the reckless confidence only children possess. Navigating it requires a kind of practiced patience, an acceptance that you will be jostled, splashed, and occasionally shouted at, simply for existing in the wrong spot at the wrong moment. By the time you reach wherever you're actually headed, you'll have dodged at least one wayward goat, one suspicious puddle, and one merchant convinced you are about to steal a fig. Welcome to rush hour, Roman style. There's no traffic app that could possibly prepare you for this. It's time to talk about slaves, because in Rome, they are simply everywhere, doing everything, and their presence quietly shapes nearly every interaction you have today. Wealthier households run on the labor of people who owned nothing, not even their own names half the time, and the uncomfortable truth sits underneath every gleaming villa and marble floor. We'll come back to this honestly, because it deserves more than a joke. Understand first the sheer scale of it. Slavery is woven into the entire structure of Roman society, touching every level from the grandest senatorial household down to modest shopkeepers who might own just one or two people to help run daily errands. Enslaved people are acquired through conquest, through birth, through debt, and through trade, and their labor forms the invisible foundation beneath nearly everything you've encountered so far today. The bread baked before dawn, the water hauled from the fountain, the bathhouse furnace burning somewhere below your feet later this evening. The roles vary enormously, and that variation matters. Some enslaved people work brutal, punishing labor in mines or on agricultural estates, lives that are short, grueling, and largely undocumented by the histories written by the people who owned them. Others serve inside wealthy households as tutors, secretaries, cooks, or personal attendants, occupying a strange middle position where genuine skill and even affection might exist alongside the fundamental, unchangeable fact of their bondage. A gifted Greek tutor teaching a senator's children might be treated with real respect day to day, and still remain, by law, property that could be sold at any moment. There is a legal pathway to freedom, called manumission, through which an enslaved person might eventually be freed by their owner, sometimes as a reward for loyal service, sometimes purchased through savings the enslaved person managed to accumulate themselves. Freed people, called freedmen, gain a genuine, if limited, form of citizenship and could go on to build businesses, raise families, and see their children born fully free. It's a detail that complicates any simple picture, a system capable of producing both extraordinary cruelty and, occasionally, genuine paths toward a different life. None of that should soften the core reality, though. This is a society that treats human beings as legal property, subject to sale, punishment, and the absolute authority of an owner, with no meaningful protection against abuse in most circumstances. It is not a footnote to Roman daily life. It is the engine running underneath nearly all of it, the labor making possible the leisure, the baths, the banquets, and the busy, bustling streets you've been wandering through all morning. We're going to keep this one honest rather than funny, because it deserves that much. The comfort and convenience so many Romans enjoyed, and that we've been cheerfully narrating our way through, rested on the backs of people who had no say in the matter at all. And any full account of this place has to hold that truth alongside the wonder, without flinching from it, before we head back out into the noise and colour of the city. Let's cut through the Forum, Rome's town square, marketplace, courtroom, and gossip mill, all crammed into one dusty plaza. Politicians debate on the steps. Merchants shout over each other like a stock exchange with sandals. Somewhere, a rumour about someone's marriage is being passed along faster than actual news, because in Rome, gossip travels roughly at the speed of scandal. Look around and take in the sheer density of purpose packed into this one open space. Temples rise on every side, their columns catching the midday sun, dedicated to gods who are consulted before elections, before battles, before, frankly, most decisions of any real consequence. Basilicas, long covered halls used for legal proceedings and business, line the edges, and inside them, lawyers argue cases with the same theatrical flair a courtroom drama might envy, complete with dramatic pauses and appeals to the crowd gathered just outside to listen in. The speaker's platform, called the rostra, decorated famously with the prows of captured enemy ships, serves as Rome's public stage, where politicians deliver speeches to crowds that gather with all the energy of people watching a particularly heated town hall meeting, minus the folding chairs. Rhetoric is practically a competitive sport here, and a skilled orator can hold a crowd's attention through sheer force of voice and gesture, building arguments the way a modern lawyer might, if that lawyer were also expected to entertain. Merchants have set up shop wherever there's room, hawking everything from imported silks to fresh fish, still glistening from the morning catch, their voices competing for attention in a constant overlapping roar. Ever walked through an outdoor market on a Saturday morning, weaving between stalls while 3 different vendors try to get your attention at once? Multiply that by the political and legal business of an entire empire happening simultaneously in the same square, and you've got something close to the actual experience of a Roman Wednesday. Gossip moves through this space with startling efficiency, a genuine information network built entirely on foot traffic and loose lips. Someone overhears a senator's argument with his wife. By the time that story has passed through 3 more conversations near the temple steps, it's grown a scandal, a secret lover, and possibly a poisoning, none of which happened, all of which will be repeated as fact by dinner. It is, in essence, the original social media feed, minus the screens and plus significantly more shouting. Statues of famous Romans stand scattered throughout, honouring generals, statesmen, and the occasionally self-important individual who paid handsomely to have his likeness placed somewhere prominent. It's not so different, really, from a modern city naming a building after whoever wrote the biggest cheque, except here the monument is a very serious marble face staring down at you while you try to buy a fish. By the time you've pushed your way through to the other side, you've absorbed more political opinion, market pricing, and unverified rumour than most people manage in a full week, all before lunch. Rome doesn't really have a news cycle. It just has the forum, running continuously, forever, at full volume. Now it's time to buy something, which means it's time to haggle, because fixed prices are a concept Rome has simply never heard of. Every transaction here is a small performance, a back and forth of feigned outrage and reluctant compromise that would put any modern used car lot to shame. You'll walk away thinking you won. You did not win. The markets themselves sprawl across covered halls and open squares alike, stocked with goods pulled from every corner of an empire that stretches from Britain to North Africa to the edges of the Middle East. Spices from the east perfume the air with something warm and unfamiliar. Bolts of fabric hang in rich, dyed colours. Fresh produce arrives daily from the surrounding countryside, and fish, still twitching in some cases, gets hauled up from the coast fast enough to reach the city before the smell fully sets in. Haggling here isn't an occasional negotiation reserved for big purchases. It's the default mode of nearly every transaction, from a loaf of bread to a length of silk. A merchant names a price with total confidence. You counter with theatrical disbelief. He clutches his chest as though personally wounded, and the two of you settle somewhere in the middle after several rounds of mutual exaggeration. Ever tried negotiating with a contractor who insists his quote is already rock bottom, only to watch the number drop the moment you start walking away? Rome invented that exact dance, minus the contractor, and plus a man selling olives who genuinely seems offended you'd question his integrity. Coinage itself carries its own quiet complexity, different denominations for different purposes, some coins stamped with the current emperor's face, a small daily reminder of exactly whose empire you're spending your money in. Counting exact change in the middle of a crowded, shouting market, while someone behind you is trying to squeeze past with a basket of live chickens, requires a specific kind of multitasking that modern grocery store self-checkout lines simply cannot prepare you for. Weights and measures are meant to be standardized, and officials do occasionally check stalls for cheating merchants using rigged scales, though enforcement is spotty at best. A savvy shopper learns to watch the scale itself as closely as the price, because a thumb pressed subtly against the wrong side of the balance is an old trick that predates Rome and will certainly outlive it. Beyond the simple economics of it, the market functions as a genuine social hub, a place to catch up on news, spot familiar faces, and exchange the kind of small talk that oils the wheels of daily life. Vendors remember regular customers, offer slightly better prices to those who return often, and treat the whole exchange as much a relationship as a transaction. By the time you finally walk away, arms full of bread, olives, and a length of cloth you probably overpaid for, you've engaged in more theatre than most modern actors manage in a season. And somewhere behind you, that merchant is already grinning at the next customer, ready to be personally wounded all over again.
Let's start heading toward the baths, because in Rome, this isn't a quick errand. It's basically a national pastime. You'll walk past temples, fountains, and roughly 400 people who all seem to know each other, until finally the great domed building comes into view, steam curling out of it like the whole structure is quietly exhaling. The scale of these public bathhouses, called therme, is genuinely staggering. Some large enough to hold thousands of bathers at once, complete with libraries, gardens, exercise yards, and lecture halls tucked into the same sprawling complex. This is not a quick rinse before bed. This is an entire afternoon's social calendar, and most Romans, regardless of wealth, make the trip nearly every single day, because bathing here is less hygiene and more community ritual, closer to visiting your favorite coffee shop than scrubbing yourself clean. The admission price is famously almost comically low, cheap enough that even the poorest citizens can usually scrape together the entry fee, which means the baths function as one of the few genuinely shared spaces where senators and shopkeepers might find themselves undressing in the same room. Ever imagine your boss and the person who delivers your mail ending up at the same neighborhood pool on a Saturday? Rome built an entire institution around exactly that overlap, and somehow made it work. As you approach, the sounds shift.
the shouting of the market fading into something different. A low, echoing murmur of voices bouncing off high, vaulted ceilings, punctuated by splashing water and the occasional burst of laughter from somewhere deep inside. The architecture itself announces its own importance. Soaring domes and thick walls engineered specifically to hold in heat, a genuine feat of Roman engineering hiding behind what looks, from the outside, like just another impressive public building. Vendors cluster near the entrance, hawking small bottles of oil, strigils for scraping skin, and snacks for anyone who didn't think to eat before arriving. Because apparently, even ancient Romans understood the appeal of grabbing a quick bite before a long, relaxing session. Beggars and hangers-on linger near the doors too, hoping for a coin from someone in a generous mood after a good soak. A detail that suggests some things about human nature really don't change, no matter how many centuries pass. Inside, you can already feel the temperature climbing, room by room. The complex laid out deliberately to move bathers through a sequence, cool to warm to hot and back again. An entire choreography built around your own body's tolerance for heat. It's less a single room and more a small city unto itself. Corridors branching off toward exercise yards, reading rooms, and quiet courtyards where you might sit and discuss philosophy with a stranger you've never met and will probably never see again. By the time you actually step through the entrance, you've already absorbed some of that particular Roman calm. The sense that whatever waited for you outside can simply wait a little longer. Because for the next few hours, you belong entirely to the baths. And the baths, as you're about to discover, have several very specific rooms they'd like you to visit in a very specific order. Let's step into the tepidarium, the changing room, where you strip down, hand your belongings to a slave or a locker cubby, and hope fervently that both are still there when you return. Theft here is a genuine occupational hazard of bathing, so casual that some bathers hire a personal guard just to watch a pile of clothes. Nothing says relaxation quite like paying someone to babysit your sandals. The room itself is lined with small niches carved directly into the walls. Simple shelves meant to hold your folded tunic, your sandals, and whatever small valuables you didn't have the sense to leave at home. There's no lock, no key, no attendant checking claim tickets, just a wall of open cubbies and the honour system, which, predictably, gets abused constantly. Bathhouse theft is common enough that it shows up regularly in complaints and legal records, ordinary Romans grumbling about missing cloaks with the exact same tired frustration you might reserve for a stolen umbrella at the gym. Undressing itself happens with a casualness that would probably surprise you more than anything else today. Nudity in the baths is simply the norm, unremarkable, practical, entirely without the fuss modern culture tends to attach to it. Men and women typically bathe separately, either in different sections of the same complex or at different scheduled hours, though the exact arrangement shifts depending on the era and the particular establishment. Ever walked into a gym locker room and had that brief, awkward moment of figuring out where to look? Now imagine that moment simply never existing, because everyone around you decided centuries ago that clothes are for the street and skin is for the bathhouse. If you can afford it, a slave accompanies you here, folding your tunic neatly, guarding your things, and generally making sure your brief transition from clothed citizen to bathing patron goes as smoothly as possible. If you can't afford your own attendant, you're relying on the somewhat questionable protection of a shared space full of strangers, some of whom are undoubtedly eyeing that nice cloak you brought. The room hums with a particular energy, the sound of sandals slapping against stone floors, quiet conversations about the day's news, and the occasional shout when someone discovers their belongings have, in fact, wandered off without them. There's a rhythm to it, familiar and communal, the exact opposite of the private, quick change you might experience ducking into a bathroom stall to swap into gym clothes. Once undressed, you'll rub yourself down with a bit of oil before heading further in, a preparatory step that makes the coming heat and eventual scraping considerably more effective. It's an odd feeling at first, walking bare-skinned and freshly oiled through a building full of equally bare-skinned strangers, though within a few visits, most people report the whole ritual starts to feel less strange and more like simply part of the day, the same way you'd stop noticing the specific smell of your own gym after enough visits. And with your clothes tucked away, guarded or not, you're ready to move deeper into the complex, toward the first proper room of the actual bathing sequence, where things start, gently, to warm up. It's time to enter the tepidarium, the warm room, which functions as a kind of gentle onboarding process for your body before things get serious. The air is mild, the tiles are pleasantly warm underfoot, and everyone moves a little slower here, like a room full of people collectively deciding it's fine to stop pretending they're busy. This room exists specifically as a transition, a deliberate pause between the cool outside world and the punishing heat waiting further in. The walls are often decorated, mosaics of sea creatures or mythological scenes tiling the floor and lower walls, giving you something pleasant to look at while your body adjusts to the climbing temperature. It's less a functional necessity and more a small luxury, proof that the engineers who built this place understood something about comfort that plenty of modern buildings still get wrong. Underneath your feet, quite literally, is one of Rome's genuinely impressive engineering achievements, a system called the hypercaust, where raised floors sit atop a network of brick pillars, allowing hot air from furnaces below to circulate freely and heat the room from the ground up.
Slaves stationed in the basement feed these furnaces constantly, a physically brutal job performed in cramped, smoke-filled conditions that most bathers upstairs never think about for even a moment, while they enjoy the pleasant warmth radiating gently beneath their feet. Conversation flows easily in this room, a low, comfortable murmur of Romans discussing business, politics, and the kind of gossip that seems to follow this city everywhere it goes. It's a space for socializing as much as bathing, not unlike the lounge area of a modern spa, if that spa also doubled as an informal meeting spot for half the city's business deals. Ever noticed how some of the most productive conversations at a conference happen not during the actual sessions, but standing around afterward with a drink in hand? The tepidarium serves that exact same social function, minus the drink, plus significantly more sweat. The heat here isn't intense,
more a gentle, encompassing warmth that seeps into your skin gradually, easing you toward the idea of the much hotter room waiting just beyond. Ancient bathers understood this progression as essential, a way of preparing the body properly rather than shocking it all at once. And modern sauna culture, in its own way, still follows the exact same logic centuries later. You might linger here longer than you expect, chatting with a stranger about the latest chariot race results, or simply sitting quietly, letting your muscles loosen in the mild heat. There's no rush, no clock ticking down your allotted time, just the unhurried rhythm of an afternoon that Romans have decided, collectively and without ever really discussing it, belongs to relaxation rather than productivity. Eventually, though, the room does its job and your body starts to feel ready, or at least resigned for what comes next. Because just beyond this pleasant, easy warmth waits a room that takes the whole concept of heat considerably more seriously. And there's no version of the full bathing ritual that lets you skip it. Now brace yourself for the caldarium, the hot room, where the heat hits you like an opinionated aunt. Steam rises from heated floors below, warmed by furnaces tended by unseen slaves who are, frankly, having a much harder day than you are. You'll sweat freely, unglamorously, and in the close company of several dozen strangers doing exactly the same. The temperature here is genuinely intense. Thick, humid air pressing against your skin the moment you step through the doorway. The kind of heat that makes breathing feel like a small, deliberate act rather than something you do without thinking. A large basin of hot water sits at one end, sunk into the floor, where bathers might dip in briefly or simply sit near its edge, letting the steam do most of the work. The engineering beneath your feet is working overtime now, that same hypercaust system pumping considerably hotter air through the floor and walls, turning the whole room into something closer to a very elaborate, very ancient sauna. Sweat, at this point, becomes simply unavoidable, running freely down your back and pooling uncomfortably in places you'd rather not think about. Everyone around you is in the exact same condition, glistening, red-faced, and utterly unbothered by it. Because there's no room for vanity here, only the shared, communal experience of everyone slowly turning into a puddle together. Ever sat in a crowded sauna at a gym, trying to maintain some dignity while quietly melting? Rome perfected that particular brand of shared, sweaty discomfort long before your gym membership existed. The heat serves a genuine purpose beyond simple discomfort, opening pores and loosening the grime, oil, and general accumulated dirt of daily Roman life, preparing your skin for the scraping that comes next.
It's an entirely different approach to cleanliness than anything involving soap, relying instead on heat, sweat, and oil working together to lift dirt away from the body rather than washing it off directly. Conversation, somehow, still continues here, though in shorter bursts between laboured breaths, Romans discussing business or trading news, even as sweat drips steadily down their faces. There's a particular kind of camaraderie that develops among people suffering through intense heat together, a shared understanding
that everyone in the room has mutually agreed this discomfort is, somehow, worth it. Beneath the floor, of course, the real labour continues without pause. Slaves stoking furnaces in cramped, smoky basement rooms, feeding wood into fires that must be kept burning constantly to maintain the temperature bathers upstairs are so casually enjoying. It's a stark contrast worth sitting with for a moment. The leisurely sweat of the wealthy, directly powered by the grueling, unseen labour of people who will never get to enjoy the room from this side of the floor. Eventually, your body reaches its limit, skin flushed, breath shortened, and the idea of anything remotely cool starts to sound like the single greatest thing anyone has ever proposed. Which is convenient, because that's exactly what's coming next, and Rome, in typical fashion, has decided the transition should be as abrupt and shocking as humanly possible. Let's talk about the frigidarium, the cold pool, which exists purely to remind your nervous system who's really in charge. After roasting in the caldarium, you're expected to plunge into water cold enough to question your life choices. The Romans insist this is invigorating. Your gasping, involuntary yelp suggests otherwise. The pool itself sits in a room designed to feel like the polar opposite of everything you've just experienced. Cool marble, high, airy ceilings, and water drawn specifically to stay chilled, sometimes fed by aqueduct systems, bringing genuinely cold water in from mountain sources outside the city. The contrast the moment you step in is immediate and total. Your overheated skin suddenly gripped by cold that seems to reach straight down into your bones, a full-body shock that leaves you gasping despite every intention of staying composed in front of strangers. Romans genuinely believe in the health benefits of this abrupt temperature swing, convinced that closing the pores after the heat of the caldarium tightens the skin, boosts circulation, and generally does something vaguely restorative for the body, even if the actual medical mechanism would raise more than a few eyebrows among modern physicians. Ever watch someone at a spa insist that jumping into a cold plunge pool after a sauna is genuinely good for you? Then watch their face contort in exactly the way yours is about to. Rome had that exact same enthusiastic believer 2,000 years before your gym installed one. The room echoes differently than the others, cooler acoustics bouncing off marble and water, voices sounding sharper and more immediate than the muffled warmth of the rooms you've just left behind. Some bathers linger here only briefly, a quick dunk before moving on, while others, apparently gluttons for punishment, swim proper laps, treating the icy water with a casualness that suggests either genuine toughness or a total loss of feeling in their extremities. There's a social element here too, because of course there is. Romans chatting even as they shiver, comparing the temperature to previous visits, debating whether today's water feels colder than usual, small talk conducted through visibly chattering teeth. It's the ancient equivalent of standing around a pool, complaining about how cold it is, while somehow still not getting out. The engineering behind keeping this water reliably cold, especially in a city built around the technology of heating everything else, deserves genuine admiration. Aqueducts channeling water from distant, cooler sources directly into these basins, a level of infrastructure planning that modern cities would still consider impressive. It's a small reminder, tucked into what feels like the most uncomfortable room in the entire complex,
of just how sophisticated Roman engineering really was, solving problems of temperature and water flow with tools that had no electricity behind them at all. By the time you climb out, breathless and thoroughly shocked back into full alertness, something has genuinely shifted. Your skin feels tight, your senses sharpened, your entire body buzzing in a way that, despite every instinct screaming otherwise during the actual plunge, does feel oddly, undeniably good. Which is convenient, because the next step in this whole elaborate ritual is about to get considerably more hands-on and considerably more thorough. It's time to actually get clean, and Rome does this without a bar of soap in sight. Instead, you're coated in olive oil, worked into the skin, then scraped off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, dragging the oil, sweat and grime away in one satisfying motion. It's less bathing, more full-body squeegee, and somehow it works. The process begins with oil applied generously across your skin, either by your own hand or, if you can afford the luxury, by a slave whose job is specifically dedicated to this exact task. The oil itself is often scented, infused with herbs or perfumes depending on what you're willing to pay, turning what sounds like a purely functional process into something bordering on genuine indulgence. It seeps into pores already opened by the heat of the caldarium, loosening dirt, dead skin, and the accumulated grime of daily Roman life in a way that feels, once you get past the initial strangeness of it, remarkably effective. Then comes the strigil, a curved metal blade, sometimes bronze, sometimes iron, drawn firmly across the skin in long, deliberate strokes. Watching someone use one on themselves for the first time looks almost alarming, like they're preparing to shave their entire body with a small, blunt sword. But the motion is practiced and controlled, scraping away the oil along with everything it's lifted from your skin. Ever used one of those long-handled back scratchers and felt an almost embarrassing amount of relief? Multiply that sensation across your entire body, performed by someone who does this professionally, and you start to understand why Romans consider this the actual highlight of the whole bathing experience. Wealthier Romans typically have their own personal slave handle this task, someone skilled enough to apply just the right pressure, working systematically across arms, legs, back, and chest with practiced efficiency. For those without access to private help, there are attendants working the baths specifically for this purpose, available for a small fee, or you simply do your best scraping the parts of your own body you can actually reach, which, predictably, leaves your back in a permanent state of only partial cleanliness. The used oil scraped away in this process, mixed with sweat and dead skin, doesn't simply get discarded either. Strange as it sounds, this scraped-off residue, called strigmentum, occasionally gets collected and repurposed, sometimes marketed as having medicinal properties, sold to those who believe it holds some lingering benefit from whatever wealthy or famous bather it originally came from. It's a genuinely bizarre footnote in Roman commerce, the ancient equivalent of someone selling celebrity bathwater and finding eager buyers. The overall effect, once the process is complete, is undeniably pleasant. Skin smooth, refreshed, and genuinely clean, in a way that soap, notably absent from this entire ritual, simply isn't required to achieve. There's a reason this method persists for centuries across the empire. Oil and scraping proving remarkably effective long before anyone in Rome had ever considered lathering up with anything resembling modern soap.
By the time you're fully scraped, oiled, sweated, and plunged, you've been thoroughly, elaborately cleaned through a process that took the better part of an afternoon and involved considerably more staff than your own morning shower back home. And now, gleaming and refreshed, you're ready to discover that the bathhouse was never really just about getting clean at all. Let's talk about what actually happens inside these baths beyond bathing, because the bathhouse doubles as Rome's real boardroom. Senators strike deals here. Merchants trade gossip and contracts in the same breath, all of it conducted in total nudity, which means somewhere in Rome right now, someone is negotiating the price of grain while wearing absolutely nothing but confidence. Consider the sheer strangeness of this from a modern perspective. Entire business empires, political alliances, and social reputations being shaped and reshaped in a room full of naked strangers, all treating the arrangement as completely unremarkable. There's no boardroom table, no formal contracts signed in the moment, just conversation flowing easily between soaking bodies, the kind of casual, unguarded talk that happens when everyone involved has already dispensed with the usual armor of clothing and status symbols. For many Romans, the baths function as the genuine social center of daily life, more important in some ways than the forum itself, because here the pretense drops slightly. A senator soaking in the same pool as a wealthy merchant finds himself on more equal footing than he would anywhere else in the city, stripped, quite literally, of the visual markers that usually separate them. Ever noticed how the most honest conversations at a work retreat happen not during the scheduled meetings, but during some unrelated group activity where everyone's guard is down? Rome built an entire institution around exactly that principle, just with considerably less clothing involved. Politicians use the baths deliberately as a networking opportunity, timing their visits to coincide with influential figures, striking up conversations that might lead to political support or business partnerships. It's an open secret that plenty of genuine deals happen here rather than in any official setting. Informal handshake agreements made while both parties are dripping wet and utterly without pockets to shake hands out of. The gossip network here runs just as efficiently as the one in the forum, perhaps even more so, since the relaxed atmosphere tends to loosen tongues considerably. Affairs, scandals, and political manoeuvring all get discussed with a casualness that suggests everyone involved has simply accepted that privacy, in this particular room, was never really part of the arrangement to begin with. Philosophers and teachers sometimes hold informal lectures in adjoining rooms or courtyards attached to the larger bath complexes, drawing small crowds willing to discuss ideas while still slightly damp from their most recent soak. It's a genuinely unique blend of leisure and intellectual life, education and relaxation, occupying the exact same physical space in a way that modern gyms, for all their juice bars and rooftop lounges, have never quite managed to replicate. There's something almost democratic about the whole arrangement too, even accounting for the very real class divisions still simmering beneath the surface.
The wealthy might have private slaves attending to their oil and scraping, but they're still sharing the same water, the same steam, the same general space as everyone else who paid the modest entry fee. It's one of the few genuine points of overlap between vastly different social classes in a city otherwise deeply, rigidly stratified. By the time you leave the baths later this afternoon, you'll have absorbed more political gossip, informal business chatter, and casual philosophical debate than most people manage in an entire week of scheduled meetings, all conducted
appropriately enough for Rome, almost entirely without clothes. Now consider the people actually running this place. The slaves who stoke the furnaces below, oil the bathers, pluck unwanted hair with alarming enthusiasm, and generally keep the entire elaborate machine humming. Their labour is constant, exhausting, and largely invisible to the very people lounging blissfully above them. Deep beneath the marble floors and painted ceilings, in cramped, smoke-choked basement corridors, enslaved workers tend furnaces that must never be allowed to go out, feeding wood constantly into fires that heat every single room bathers move through so casually above. The work is physically brutal, performed in oppressive heat and thick smoke, with none of the pleasant steam and gentle warmth experienced by the paying patrons enjoying the results several floors up. It's the kind of labour that gets you a shortened life expectancy and absolutely no recognition. The literal engine room powering an entire afternoon of leisure that most bathers never think about even once. Above ground, slaves and paid attendants handle the more visible work, applying oil, wielding strigils, managing the changing rooms, and generally attending to every physical need a bather might have. Some develop genuine reputations for skill. A particularly gifted attendant, known for expert scraping or a soothing oil application, might be requested by name, becoming something close to a minor celebrity within the social circle of regular bathers, even while remaining, legally, someone else's property. Then there are the hair pluckers, whose entire job involves removing unwanted body hair using tweezers, a task performed with such enthusiastic vigour that ancient writers occasionally complained about the specific, high-pitched shrieking sound of customers reacting to the process, apparently audible throughout entire sections of the bathhouse. Ever winced through an eyebrow threading appointment and wondered if it was really worth the discomfort? Romans apparently asked themselves that exact same question, out loud, at considerable volume, for the entertainment of everyone within earshot. Attendants also manage practical logistics, keeping towels and oils stocked, sweeping wet floors, and generally maintaining a level of order in a building constantly filled with hundreds of wet, oiled, distracted people moving between rooms. It's a genuinely demanding operational challenge, not unlike running a massive modern gym or spa, except with considerably higher stakes if the furnace crew below happens to slip up on temperature control. Vendors selling snacks, oils, and small trinkets circulate through the complex too, some enslaved and working on behalf of an owner, others free citizens running small independent businesses, catering specifically to bathhouse crowds. It creates a genuinely bustling little economy contained entirely within these walls. Dozens of workers, some free and some not, all cooperating to keep the whole complex running smoothly for guests, who mostly never learn any of their names. The contrast, once you really sit with it, is stark and uncomfortable. The luxurious leisure enjoyed by bathers resting directly and entirely on the exhausting, often dangerous labour of people who have no say in their own circumstances. It's a pattern that echoes through nearly every corner of Roman comfort you've encountered today. Comfort for some, built quite literally on the backs of others. A truth worth remembering even as you step, refreshed and gleaming, toward the exercise yard just beyond the changing room. Let's step into the palaestra, the exercise yard attached to the baths, where Romans wrestle, toss balls, and generally work up a sweat before washing it all off again, which seems, on reflection, like doing laundry before rolling in the mud. Still, there's real athletic pride here, and plenty of showing off for anyone watching. This open courtyard, often lined with covered colonnades providing shade from the sun, serves as the athletic heart of the Bathhouse complex, a space where Romans engage in wrestling, boxing, and various ball games before heading in for their actual bathing routine. The logic, once you accept it, makes a certain sense. Working up a proper sweat first ensures the subsequent oil, scrape, and soak sequence has genuinely earned dirt and exertion to clean away, rather than simply the ordinary grime of a normal day. Wrestling matches draw enthusiastic small crowds, participants grappling on sand-covered ground specifically chosen to cushion falls, while onlookers shout encouragement or good-natured mockery, depending on how the match is going. It's not unlike watching an informal pick-up basketball game at a local park, competitive enough to matter, casual enough that nobody's actual career depends on the outcome, though pride is very much on the line regardless. Ball games are especially popular, various forms played with small leather balls stuffed with feathers or sometimes air, tossed between players in games with rules that varied significantly depending on region and era, some resembling a distant cousin of modern handball or a very energetic game of catch. Older Romans, less inclined toward wrestling, often favour a gentler ball game meant to keep the body loosely active without demanding the kind of exertion younger athletes throw themselves into with such enthusiasm. Exercise here carries genuine philosophical weight too, reflecting a broader cultural admiration, borrowed significantly from Greek tradition, for the cultivated, disciplined body as a reflection of a disciplined mind. Athletic training isn't viewed merely as physical upkeep. It's considered part of a well-rounded life, alongside rhetoric, philosophy, and civic duty, the ancient equivalent of a wellness routine that somehow also carries intellectual prestige. Younger men, in particular, use this space to display physical fitness and competitive spirit, sometimes watched by fathers or mentors evaluating their progress, sometimes simply enjoying the chance to show off in front of an audience of peers. Ever gone to a gym specifically because you knew certain people you wanted to impress would be there too? The palaestra operated on that exact same social principle 2,000 years before anyone invented a gym mirror specifically for that purpose. Equipment here is minimal by modern standards, just weighted objects for lifting, sand for wrestling, and open space for running or ball games. But the simplicity doesn't diminish the seriousness with which participants approach it. Trainers, sometimes former athletes themselves, offer instruction and correction, treating technique with genuine expertise rather than casual guesswork. By the time you've worked up a proper sweat here, dust and sand clinging to newly oiled skin, you're finally, genuinely, ready for the full sequence of rooms waiting just beyond. The whole exhausting, exhilarating cycle of heat, cold, oil and scraping, now fully earned rather than simply indulged in for its own sake. Which is convenient, because after all that exertion, you're going to want something to eat. It's time to grab a bite, because somehow, after all that soaking and scraping, you're famished. Vendors circle the baths, selling sausages, bread, and honeyed treats, turning the whole complex into part spa, part food court. an arrangement your local gym has strangely never considered. Wander through the courtyards and covered walkways surrounding the main bathing rooms, and you'll find small vendors set up with portable stalls, or simply walking through the crowd carrying trays, hawking exactly the kind of food you'd want after an afternoon of sweating, plunging, and wrestling. Sausages, grilled over small portable braziers, fill the air with a smoky, savoury smell that cuts sharply through the oil and steam scent that's followed you through every room today. Bread, sometimes plain, sometimes stuffed with cheese or honey, gets sold in convenient portions, perfect for eating one-handed, while still dripping slightly from your last plunge in the frigidarium. Sweets are especially popular here. Small honeyed cakes or fruit preserved in syrup, the kind of treat that feels indulgent precisely because you've earned it through genuine physical effort, rather than simply deciding you deserved a snack. Ever left an intense workout class and immediately justified an entirely unnecessary treat on the way home because, hey, you exercised? Romans apparently had that exact same internal negotiation, just conducted while still slightly damp and wrapped in a towel. Wine, often mixed generously with water, flows freely too, sold by vendors moving through the crowd, or available at small stalls set up specifically for this purpose. Drinking here is treated with the same casual, communal spirit as everything else happening in the bathhouse. Small cups shared and refilled as conversation continues, the wine itself often more about social lubrication than any real intoxication, given how diluted it typically is. The overall effect turns the bathhouse into something closer to a full social and culinary destination than a simple place to get clean. An entire afternoon's entertainment encompassing exercise, bathing, business, gossip, and now food, all contained within the same sprawling complex. It's genuinely difficult to find a modern equivalent that combines quite so many different activities under one roof, though a very ambitious resort with a spa, gym, restaurant, and casual networking lounge attached might come reasonably close. Children, too, when present, tend to gravitate toward these food vendors, small hands reaching up with coins scraped together for a honeyed treat, parents indulging them after a long afternoon spent largely entertaining themselves in the shallower pools, while adults handled business and gossip elsewhere in the complex. There's something genuinely appealing about the unhurried nature of it all. No rush to finish eating and move along to the next scheduled activity. Just Romans lingering, snacking, chatting, and generally treating the entire afternoon as one long, loosely structured social event, rather than a series of separate errands to check off a list. By the time you finished your sausage, wiped honey from your fingers, and finished the last sip of watered wine, the afternoon has stretched considerably longer than you probably intended, though nobody here seems remotely concerned about that. There's still, however, one more room left to visit before you head home, and it's easily the least glamorous stop on this entire tour. Now for something nobody puts on the postcards: the public latrines.
Long stone benches with holes cut side by side. No partitions, no privacy. Just rows of Romans sitting shoulder to shoulder mid-conversation. A shared sponge on a stick serves as the communal toilet paper, rinsed and reused, which is a sentence that should end several friendships. Step into one of these public facilities, often attached to the bathhouse complex itself, and you'll find a long, continuous stone bench running along the walls, holes cut at regular intervals, water flowing constantly beneath in a channel designed to carry waste away toward the city's larger sewage system. There's no wall between one seat and the next, no door, no curtain, just an open room where a dozen or more people sit companionably in a row, conducting business both literal and conversational at exactly the same time. Conversation here continues just as freely as everywhere else in Roman social life. Business discussed, gossip exchanged, political opinions debated, all while everyone present handles matters that most modern cultures would insist on doing in strict, guarded privacy. Ever accidentally ended up in adjacent stalls at a public restroom with someone you know, and had that deeply awkward moment of trying to decide whether to acknowledge each other? Rome skipped past that awkwardness entirely by simply removing the stalls, the privacy, and apparently the concept of awkwardness altogether. Beneath the bench runs a channel of flowing water, part of the broader sewer system that Rome, for all its other quirks, genuinely excels at engineering. This constant water flow carries waste away efficiently, a level of sanitation infrastructure that many cities wouldn't match again for well over 1,000 years afterward. It's a genuine point of pride, buried inside what otherwise looks like an almost unbearably undignified setup. The famous shared sponge, called a tersorium, sits attached to a stick, kept in a bucket of water or sometimes vinegar between uses, available to anyone needing it, rinsed after use, and left for the next person entirely. This detail tends to horrify modern audiences more than almost anything else about Roman daily life, and reasonably so, given what historians understand today about how such a shared, only loosely sanitized item might spread illness through repeated use. There's also a lingering, if disputed, tradition suggesting Romans occasionally used communal urine collected in these facilities for other purposes entirely, including, as you'll discover shortly, laundry. The idea that today's bathroom might double as tomorrow's laundry supply chain is exactly the kind of detail that makes Roman daily life feel simultaneously sophisticated and thoroughly, delightfully strange. Small statues or shrines dedicated to Fortuna, goddess of luck, sometimes decorate these facilities too, a small hedge against whatever misfortune might occur in a room this exposed, this communal, and this thoroughly lacking in any privacy whatsoever. By the time you leave, you've experienced perhaps the single most culturally jarring stop on this entire tour. Proof that even a civilization capable of aqueducts, heated floors, and genuinely impressive plumbing still drew a very different line than you might expect around the concept of personal privacy. Let's walk back through the Fuller's district, where laundry is washed using stale urine collected from public pots, because ammonia is ammonia, and the Romans were nothing if not resourceful.
The smell announces the neighborhood long before you see it, a fact your nose will not let you forget anytime soon. The workers here, called fullones, run an entire industry dedicated to cleaning and treating wool cloth, and their primary tool, uncomfortably enough, is urine, collected specifically for its ammonia content, which proves remarkably effective at breaking down oils and dirt embedded in fabric. Large ceramic pots are placed on street corners throughout the city specifically for public use. Passers-by encouraged, sometimes even taxed, to contribute, turning an ordinary bodily function into a genuine raw material for the textile industry. Inside the fuller's workshops, workers stand knee-deep in stone basins filled with this collected urine, stomping and treading on cloth submerged within it, using their feet to work the liquid thoroughly through the fabric in a process not entirely unlike stomping grapes, if grapes were considerably less pleasant to think about. Ever wondered where the phrase about someone doing dirty work truly comes from? This particular Roman profession might be the most literal possible answer to that question. Once treated, the cloth gets rinsed thoroughly, then stretched and dried, often over a wicker frame designed to allow air circulation while maintaining the fabric's shape. Sulfur is sometimes burned nearby too, its fumes used to help whiten and further treat certain fabrics, adding yet another distinctive smell to a neighborhood already working with quite a competitive lineup of odors. The economic importance of this industry shouldn't be underestimated either, since wool clothing represents a significant portion of Roman daily wear, and keeping it clean, or at least Roman clean, requires constant, ongoing work from an entire dedicated profession. Fullers occupy a strange social position as a result, essential to daily life and genuinely skilled at their trade, yet stuck permanently with a professional reputation defined almost entirely by what their work smells like. Local ordinances occasionally attempt to regulate exactly how and where urine can be collected and stored, a genuine point of civic legislation that reveals just how seriously this smelly but essential trade was taken by city officials trying to balance industry needs against the sensibilities of nearby residents who'd really rather not live directly next to it. Walking through this district on your way home, the smell hits you well before the actual workshops come into view, a thick, sharp, unmistakable scent that lingers stubbornly in your nose long after you've passed through and moved on to quieter streets. It's an oddly humbling reminder, tucked into an otherwise glamorous day, that behind every clean toga and freshly laundered tunic sits an industry built on a resource most modern minds would prefer never to think about twice, let alone as a genuine commercial commodity. By the time you've cleared the district and the smell finally begins to fade behind you, you're more than ready for dinner. And fortunately, Rome's evening meal involves considerably less urine and considerably more reclining. It's time for cena, the evening meal, eaten reclining on your side on a couch, propped on one elbow, picking food up with your fingers, while a slave hovers nearby refilling your cup. It's a dining posture that looks relaxing and is, in practice, an excellent way to drop food directly onto your own toga. The dining room, called a triclinium, gets its name from the 3 couches arranged around a central low table, each couch meant to hold up to 3 diners reclining at an angle, propped on cushions with their feet stretched away from the table. Eating this way takes genuine practice, balancing weight on one elbow while reaching for food with your free hand, a posture that looks effortlessly elegant when a wealthy Roman does it, and considerably less elegant the first several times you attempt it yourself. Cena unfolds across multiple courses for those who can afford it, beginning with a lighter starter course of eggs, olives, or shellfish, moving through a substantial main course featuring meat, fish, and vegetables, and finishing with a dessert course of fruit or honeyed pastries. For wealthier households, this can stretch into an elaborate hours-long affair, course after course arriving in sequence, each one accompanied by wine and conversation that shows no particular hurry to conclude. Cutlery, notably, plays almost no role here, most food eaten directly with the fingers, meat cut into manageable pieces beforehand, specifically to make hand-eating practical. Spoons occasionally appear for softer foods or sauces, but the overall dining experience relies heavily on fingers, napkins, and a genuine willingness to get your hands thoroughly involved in the meal. Ever attended a fancy dinner where you weren't entirely sure which fork to use and just watched everyone else first? Rome removes that anxiety entirely by simply removing the forks. Slaves move constantly around the reclining diners, refilling wine cups, bringing fresh courses, and clearing dishes, their presence a near constant background feature of the entire meal. Wealthy hosts sometimes provide entertainment alongside the food too, musicians playing softly nearby, or occasionally more elaborate performances designed to impress guests and demonstrate the host's genuine wealth and status. Wine flows freely throughout, typically mixed with water in proportions that vary depending on the occasion and the host's generosity. Drinking it completely undiluted, considered a bit uncouth, reserved mostly for serious drinkers with something to prove. Conversation ranges widely across politics, philosophy, and gossip, the reclining posture somehow encouraging a more relaxed, unhurried style of discussion than sitting upright at a table ever quite manages. For less wealthy households, the meal is considerably simpler, a single course of porridge, vegetables, and bread, eaten perhaps sitting rather than reclining, without the elaborate multiple courses or entertainment reserved for wealthier tables. The fundamental social importance of the evening meal, though, persists across every level of Roman society, a genuine daily ritual for reconnecting with family, friends, and, if you're hosting, whoever you're hoping to impress. By the time the final course arrives and the wine has been thoroughly enjoyed, you've experienced Rome's true daily centerpiece, a meal treated with far more ceremony and unhurried attention than breakfast ever received this morning. Proof that Romans, much like plenty of modern diners, simply save their real enthusiasm for dinner. Let's talk about how Rome unwinds after dark, trading stories about the latest gladiator match with the same breathless energy your neighbour uses for a football score. Theatre, music, and scandal fill the evening air, because a day this exhausting clearly demands entertainment before bed. Gladiatorial combat occupies an outsized place in Roman conversation, and discussing the latest matches held at the amphitheatre becomes a genuine social currency, the kind of shared cultural reference point that lets total strangers strike up an easy conversation. Favourite gladiators develop passionate followings, their fighting styles and records debated with the exact same intensity modern fans reserve for professional athletes, complete with strong opinions about who's overrated and who deserves considerably more respect than they're currently getting. Theatre, too, draws significant crowds, though Roman comedic plays tend to lean heavily on broad, exaggerated humour, mistaken identities, clever slaves outsmarting foolish masters, and situations that would feel entirely at home in a modern sitcom, just performed by actors wearing exaggerated masks rather than delivered through a laugh track. Ever watched a formulaic sitcom episode and predicted the entire plot within the first 5 minutes, yet still enjoyed it anyway? Roman comedy runs on that exact same comfortable, familiar formula, and audiences apparently loved it just as reliably then as now. Music drifts through wealthier households in the evening too. Small ensembles playing stringed instruments and simple wind instruments, providing background atmosphere for continued conversation, or, occasionally, actual dedicated listening, depending on the skill of the musicians hired for the occasion.
Poetry readings sometimes feature as well, particularly among more educated circles, where a host might invite guests to hear the latest work from a celebrated writer, or, occasionally, subject them to their own amateur attempts at verse, whether the guests actually wanted to hear it or not. Gossip, unsurprisingly, remains the true backbone of evening entertainment, regardless of social class. Stories about scandalous affairs, political manoeuvring, and public embarrassments circulating with tremendous speed and even greater embellishment by the time they've passed through several retellings. A senator's minor social misstep at dinner might, by the following evening, have transformed into a full scandal involving accusations nobody actually witnessed, the kind of exaggeration that modern social media would recognize instantly and probably admire. Board games and dice provide another common form of evening relaxation. Simple games played with painted stones or carved dice, wagers sometimes attached for the more competitively minded, small stakes adding just enough tension to keep a friendly game genuinely interesting late into the evening. For those without the means for elaborate entertainment, simply sitting outside in the cooler evening air, chatting with neighbours and family, provides its own quiet form of relaxation. The day's heat finally breaking as the city's constant noise gradually, if only slightly, begins to settle. By the time the evening winds down, you've absorbed gladiator gossip, theatrical comedy, scandalous rumours, and perhaps a small wager or two on a game of dice. A full evening's entertainment that required no screens, no streaming service, and remarkably little beyond good company, and Rome's apparently bottomless appetite for a really good story. Now consider the little shrine tucked into the corner of your home, dedicated to the household gods, watching over your family, your hearth, and apparently your pantry. Romans consult omens for everything from business deals to dinner plans, treating the universe like a particularly opinionated roommate who needs constant appeasing. This small shrine, called a lararium, holds carved figures representing the lares, household spirits believed to protect the family, the home, and its overall well-being. Every household, from modest apartments to sprawling villas, maintains some version of this shrine. Offerings of food, wine, or incense left regularly as a small daily gesture of respect and, frankly, a bit of insurance against whatever misfortune might otherwise come knocking. Before meals, before journeys, before nearly any significant undertaking, a small offering or prayer directed toward these household gods is considered simply good sense, the kind of habitual, low-effort ritual that costs little and, from a Roman perspective, potentially prevents a great deal of trouble.
Ever knock on wood after saying something you probably shouldn't have jinxed? Romans built an entire structured religious practice around that exact same instinct, just considerably more organized and consistent about it. Beyond the household shrine, omens and signs play a genuinely significant role in daily decision-making at every level of society. The flight patterns of birds, the behavior of sacred chickens before battle, unusual weather, or even a stumble on the threshold might all be interpreted as meaningful signs requiring careful consideration before proceeding with whatever plan was underway. Official religious figures called augurs are specifically trained to interpret these signs, consulted before major political or military decisions, with the same seriousness a modern executive might reserve for a market analyst's report. Superstitions weave through ordinary daily behavior too. Certain days considered luckier than others for starting new ventures, specific rituals performed before long journeys, and small protective charms worn by children specifically to ward off the evil eye. A persistent belief that envious glances from others might bring genuine harm. These small charms, often shaped like a particular gesture believed to deflect ill fortune, hang around children's necks throughout the city. A quiet, constant acknowledgement that misfortune might be lurking anywhere, even in an admiring glance from a well-meaning neighbour. Larger public religious observances punctuate the calendar constantly too. Festivals dedicated to various gods, filling much of the year with public holidays, processions, and sacrifices, each one requiring careful attention to proper ritual and correct procedure. Getting the details wrong isn't merely embarrassing, it's considered genuinely dangerous, risking the gods' displeasure and whatever consequences might follow from that. There's something almost comforting, in its own strange way, about a worldview this thoroughly saturated with meaning, where nearly every event, however small, might carry significance if you simply know how to read it properly. It requires constant vigilance, certainly, and a fair amount of daily ritual most modern minds would find exhausting to maintain. But it also offers a framework, however imperfect, for making sense of a world that otherwise offers no explanations at all. By the time you've made your own small offering at the household shrine tonight, murmured whatever quiet request feels appropriate, and settled in for the evening, you've completed one final ritual in a day absolutely packed with them. The kind of quiet, private moment that closes out even the loudest, most chaotic Roman day. It's time to finally lie down, though sleep in Rome is a negotiation with your surroundings. Cart traffic is banned from the streets during the day, which means it thunders through at night instead, right beneath your window, because someone, somewhere, decided quiet hours were for other civilizations. Your mattress, likely stuffed with straw or wool, depending on your household's means, sits on a simple wooden frame, thin by any modern standard, though after a full day of walking, bathing, and reclining through an elaborate dinner, exhaustion does most of the heavy lifting toward actually falling asleep, despite the noise waiting just outside your window. That noise, as established earlier today, arrives right on schedule. Iron-wheeled carts hauling building materials and market goods rattling over uneven cobblestones just below. a nightly soundtrack that most residents have simply learned to tune out through sheer repetition and lack of any alternative. Ever lived near train tracks long enough that you genuinely stopped noticing the trains, while any house guest visiting for the first time lies awake in horror all night long? Rome's night traffic operates on that exact same principle. Deafening to newcomers, background noise to anyone who's lived here more than a month. Insects present their own persistent nighttime challenge too, particularly in the warmer months. Mosquitoes and other pests finding their way through unglazed windows with nothing but a wooden shutter standing between your exposed skin and an evening of itchy regret. Wealthier households sometimes burn specific herbs believed to discourage insects, though the effectiveness of this method varies considerably, depending on who you ask and how badly they were bitten the previous night. Temperature control, too, remains entirely at the mercy of the season. No heating beyond perhaps a small brazier for particularly cold nights, and certainly no cooling beyond an open window during the brutal heat of a Roman summer. Layers of blankets get added or removed as needed, and more than a few uncomfortable nights are simply endured with the same weary resignation Romans apply to most physical discomforts that can't easily be fixed. For those in the upper floors of an insula, structural creaking and settling adds its own unsettling nighttime soundtrack. The entire building groaning and shifting in ways that would set off genuine alarm in any modern building, though residents here have generally made peace with it, mostly because there's simply nowhere else affordable to go, and partly because worrying about it constantly would make sleep entirely impossible. Despite all of this, sleep does eventually come. Exhaustion from a genuinely full day of walking, bathing, business and dinner ultimately outweighing the noise, the bugs, and the persistent creaking of a building that's been sagging in exactly the same spot for longer than anyone currently living there can remember. And as your eyes finally close, the city outside continues entirely undisturbed by your need for rest. Carts still rattling, someone still arguing 2 floors up. Rome carrying on exactly as it has every single night for centuries, entirely unbothered by whether you, specifically, manage to get any sleep at all. Let's close out the day by admitting the obvious contradiction sitting at the centre of it all. A civilization capable of aqueducts, heated floors, and underfloor plumbing that still thought a shared sponge on a stick was a reasonable toilet solution. Rome was brilliant and baffling in equal measure, and somehow both of those things were true on the very same afternoon. Consider everything you've experienced today. Engineering sophisticated enough to heat an entire bathhouse using nothing but carefully channeled hot air. An aqueduct system delivering fresh water across staggering distances entirely through gravity, and public infrastructure genuinely ahead of anything the world would see again for well over 1,000 years. And yet, this same civilization built its wealth and daily comfort directly on the backs of enslaved people, drew sharp, rigid lines around who counted as a full citizen and who didn't, and considered a communal sponge on a stick a perfectly reasonable, unremarkable solution to a problem your own bathroom solves rather differently. It's worth sitting honestly with both halves of that contradiction, rather than smoothing either one away. The genuine wonder of Roman engineering, culture, and daily ingenuity deserves real admiration. A society that built libraries, theatres, and heated public baths accessible to nearly everyone, regardless of wealth, at a genuinely modest price. And the genuine injustice underlying so much of that comfort deserves equally honest acknowledgement. An economy and daily rhythm of life that simply could not have functioned without the forced labour of people who had no legal say in their own circumstances whatsoever. There's also something oddly relatable buried in all of this, a civilization endlessly resourceful, occasionally disgusting, deeply social, and thoroughly convinced of its own progress, not entirely unlike any modern society looking back at its own contradictions with the benefit of hindsight. Rome gossiped constantly, obsessed over sports and celebrity gladiators, complained about noisy neighbours, haggled over prices, and treated an evening meal as the genuine highlight of an exhausting day. Patterns of daily life that feel, despite the missing plumbing modernizations and the very present urine-based laundry system, strangely familiar. The people who built and lived through all of this, senators and slaves, merchants and soldiers, were navigating a world without antibiotics, without reliable long-distance communication, and without any guarantee that the aqueduct wouldn't simply break down tomorrow. And they still managed to build something that shaped the world for centuries afterward. That's worth genuine respect, however many sponges on sticks were involved along the way. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, somewhere far removed from Roman cart traffic and shared bathhouse sponges, take a quiet moment to appreciate both halves of what you experienced today, the genuine marvel and the genuine hardship, sitting side by side the way they always do in any honest account of history. Rome was never simply glorious, and it was never simply grim. It was, like most things worth remembering, considerably more complicated than either. And so our day in ancient Rome comes gently to a close. You arrived to a city already shouting, wound your way through markets and gossip, and a bathhouse that asked considerably more of you than your own shower ever has. And somewhere along the way, you started to understand the strange, particular rhythm of a place that never really learned how to whisper. You haggled and lost. You sweated in public with total strangers and somehow didn't mind. You ate dinner lying down and only dropped a little of it on yourself. Behind all the noise and the heat and the questionable plumbing was something quietly remarkable. An entire civilization built out of stubborn, resourceful people, figuring out how to live well together in impossibly close quarters, long before anyone had the benefit of hindsight to tell them how it would all turn out. They built aqueducts that still stand. They built bathhouses that doubled as town squares. And they built a city loud enough, messy enough, and alive enough that echoes of it are still audible, in small ways, in nearly every city you've ever called home. So tonight, as you sink into your own quiet bed, far from the cart traffic and the shared sponges and the smell of the Fuller's district, maybe send a small, grateful thought toward the people who built that first version of urban life, sweating it out, arguing it out, bathing it out, one impossibly crowded day at a time. Travel, even the imagined kind, has a way of reminding you that comfort is never accidental, and that somewhere behind every convenience you take for granted, someone, at some point, figured it out the hard way. Rest easy tonight. No furnace to stoke, no toga to fold, no rooster 2 floors up. Just quiet, and your own soft bed, and a very long, very loud day finally, blessedly over. Sleep well.